Trigger warning. Today's video is going to deal with some pretty horrific subject matter, including violation of basic human rights, physical injury, and putting profit over everything else. And this video is going to be tough to get through, but we need to get through it. We need to tackle it. And pretending it doesn't exist is not going to help this channel, or you, or our editorial remit of helping the world become a cleaner, greener, safer, and smarter place. And it's why I'm filming this video here rather than using the usual weekday set. Not because we want it to be flashy or special, but because this video is so important and the subject so serious that an informal set just felt wrong. Pretty much every electric car on the road today has a battery pack that uses some form of lithium-ion cell chemistry. And while not all lithium-ion battery chemistries use the metal cobalt in them, the majority of them do, as part of the cathode. Cobalt, in combination with other metals in the cathode, provides thermal stability within the cell and improves its cycle life. Cobalt, at least the stable enough part, is produced in supernovae. And while there's an estimated 7.1 million metric tons of cobalt in the world, that's about 0.0029% of the Earth's crust, very little of it is found in its purest form because of the way in which cobalt reacts with other elements in our atmosphere. Instead, it's found in chemical form in other compounds and is often produced as a byproduct of copper and nickel mining. Because of that, the so-called copper belt in the Zambia and the Democratic Republic of the Congo is responsible for mining the lion's share of the cobalt that the world currently uses. The DRC alone is responsible for more than 1/2 of the world's current supply of cobalt. The problem is that the DRC, despite its name, doesn't quite live up to that name. It's rich in natural resources but has notorious political instability, is known for rampant corruption at all levels of public life, and has a pretty poor infrastructure for modern living. In 2016, the DRC ranked 176th out of 187 countries listed on the Human Development Index. And while the DRC is a member of the United Nations, an estimated 2 million children are currently at risk of starvation there, and ongoing conflicts in the country have displaced an estimated 4.5 million people. It's no surprise then that the DRC is home to hundreds of so-called artisanal mines where copper, nickel, and cobalt are mined from the ground. And at many, not all of these mines, cobalt is being mined by young children who are being forced to work full-time for little or no pay and with zero regard for their health, development and safety. In some cases, those children are the victims of human trafficking, sold into what amounts to forced labour. In others, the children are forced to leave school to pursue the, quote, only economic option of artisanal cobalt mining, which translates to working in unsafe mines without any safety equipment and using hand tools to dig out the raw materials from which cobalt is ultimately refined. At the start of this week, a lawsuit was filed in the United States on behalf of 14 Congolese families against tech giants Apple, Dell, Microsoft and Alphabet, that's Google to you and I, alleging that they, quote, knowingly benefited from the cruel use of children as young as 6 in the Democratic Republic of the Congo to mine cobalt, a key component in lithium-ion rechargeable batteries. Alongside those tech companies, Tesla was also named as a defendant. And as I'll detail in a little while, other automakers can also be tied in by association. I should note here that while, believe me, there is substantial, compelling evidence to back these claims up, these claims are anything I think a jury would struggle to ignore. They are at this moment still claims. We need to let the justice system take its course. The working conditions for the plaintiffs have worked in, says the court papers, quote, are on the extreme end of the worst forms of child labour prohibited by the International Labour Organization rules. Those court papers, I will link to them in the show notes, but I should note they make for some really difficult reading, state that plaintiffs are seeking damages against their injuries for working in the cobalt mines, as well as seeking damages for the death of loved ones. So how did we get to this point? Well, simply put, most of the artisanal mines where such atrocities are claimed to have taken place supply larger wholesalers who then sell on the product further up the chain. By the time the cobalt has arrived at the actual company where they're refined and put into lithium-ion cells, the origins of that original material can be hard to track. But in this case, however, and what makes this case so damning, is that there are direct ties between the plaintiffs and the defendants via companies for which documented evidence exists, showcasing unsafe work practices and child labour. While Tesla and some of the other defendants do not buy directly from the mines, there is a join-the-dots style paper trail detailed in the court papers that are pretty hard to dismiss. But it's not just Tesla. On page 23 of the documented filing, the legal team for the plaintiffs detail mining giant Glencore plc, which it states was, quote, founded by convicted tax evader and illegal trader Mark Rich and is known for widespread violations of human rights and environmental laws, as well as participation in rampant corruption all over the world, supplies other companies. Glencore sells its raw material to Umicore, a Belgian company that refines these raw materials and then sells these materials to Apple, Samsung SDI, Microsoft and LG Chem, the latter which supplies Dell and Tesla. And at this point, I think it's a good point of reference to make. LG Chem supplies Tesla, Samsung SDI has certainly worked with Tesla in the past, but let's be honest, LG Chem also supplies lithium-ion cells and materials to many, many other automakers, including Hyundai, Kia, General Motors, Ford, and others. Why then are those companies not being targeted and named in this paper? Well, that's not something I can directly comment on as I'm not a lawyer. And while I read the 62-page document that was filed, it would take a long time to break it all down here. But what I can surmise here is that Tesla, like the other companies being mentioned, is a big fish. It's a high-visibility company whose court case will be highly publicised. Tesla is also currently producing far more electric vehicles and thus battery packs and cells than other automakers, so it's logical to assume that it would be consuming more cobalt than some of its rivals in the auto industry. However, if guilt is being apportioned, it's not clear if Tesla is being any more or less guilty than the other companies I've listed, although, as I've said, it's probably consuming more, ergo it could easily be argued it is causing more suffering because it's consuming more cobalt. However, the facts remain that pretty much every modern electric car today uses cobalt, and pretty much every major automaker making electric cars today has probably got some connection to cobalt, either illegally sourced or questionably sourced in the DRC. Probably? This is hard to codify. If I'm being brutally honest, I'd suggest that every automaker has at least played a part in this terrible industry at some point, and every automaker should, as a consequence, be taking responsibility for that. But luckily, some already are. Tesla is already announcing its intent to go completely cobalt-free in its lithium-ion cells and has already dramatically reduced the cobalt content in existing generation cells. BMW and Volvo have already begun their own ethically sourced supply chain verification for cobalt using blockchain. And Ford, Hiyu Cobalt, another one of the defendants by association in these court papers, LG Chem, IB and RCS also announced a pilot project back in January to do exactly the same thing with blockchain, and other automakers are following suit with similar programs. I should also note that some companies, Tesla included, are turning their attention outside of Africa for cobalt sourcing. Tesla has been investing in a Canadian town called Cobalt, Ontario, where, surprise, surprise, there is potential for mining cobalt from the ground. By switching to mines in countries where there are far stricter standards for safety, not to mention actual environmental protection standards, it should help Tesla and other companies halt their reliance on the DRC and other questionably sourced cobalt. Cobalt recycling for existing batteries is improving as well, although it's not yet super economical or possible to recycle 100% of the cobalt in a lithium-ion cell. We are learning new techniques, but we've a long way to go to commercialize them. As I've already said, the gold standard is going completely cobalt-free for lithium-ion battery packs, and leading NMC chemistries, that's nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide, in case you were interested, have reduced cobalt content to 4%, with 2% supposedly on the horizon. NCA, that's lithium nickel cobalt aluminium oxide, currently uses around 6% of cobalt. Most importantly, however, Tesla-funded research by Dr. Jeff Dahn and his team suggests it may be possible to build future chemistries with no cobalt at all without any detriment to cell life or stability. My friend Dr. Ewan McTurk, electrochemist from Ducosi Limited, thank you for your assistance with the chemistry on this one, Ewan, says cobalt-free NMC technology may be around 5 years from commercial reality, maybe with a little trace cobalt still in each cell. Cobalt-free NCA may happen sooner, but it depends on people acting on Dr. Jeff Dahn's research. Between now and that point then? Well, the reality is that if you drive an electric car today, it's likely that there may be a connection to child-sourced cobalt in your car's battery pack. It's not a foregone conclusion, but it is most definitely a possibility. That said, if the battery already exists, the damage is already done and the metaphorical horse has bolted in your car's sake. But as owners and drivers and advocates of electric vehicles, there are plenty of things we can do today to ensure these unethical practices stop. First, write to your elected officials. Demand that legislation be put in place in your country to ensure better accountability for cobalt imported into your country. Get your elected officials to put pressure on the DRC and other countries at an international level to comply with already in existence international laws. Second, write to your preferred automaker. Ask them what they're doing to solve this problem and ask them what their current cobalt sourcing chain is like. Ask them to be responsible and active rather than passive on this whole issue. Third, help educate about the alternatives. Tell people where cobalt could be mined in preference to the DRC. Encourage others to put pressure on companies and politicians that aren't doing enough, and praise those that are. This problem is a global problem, and it's up to every single one of us to play a part, especially when I'd wager most of us have the byproduct of slave and child labour in our pockets, or maybe even on our driveway. By engaging in the discussion, we can help drive the solution. By pretending it doesn't exist, we only tacitly condone it. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support what we do, you'll find links in the show notes below. I'll be back soon with more content, but until then, please keep evolving.